Because you're the one who's talking about how much you hate war, and then you voted for a guy who's threatening Greenland, the Panama Canal, and he's threatening to put troops on the ground in Gaza. You voted for this guy.
Hey, Ron. I noticed before you were talking about, you were having frustrations with Trump spending taxpayer money on the, motorcade and everything. Does spending all that money, that logic apply to the hundreds of billions we're giving to Ukraine for a war they're never going to win?
No. And here's why.
Okay.
First of all, it's not a necessity, and people aren't dying. And you can tell me if you disagree, if somebody would have lost their life if Donald Trump decided not to go to Daytona 500. So let me just ask you a series of questions, and I'll make my point, and then I'll give you the opportunity to expand. Okay? Fair, Dave?
Yeah.
Fair enough? Okay, thank you. If Donald Trump decided not to go to Daytona 500, would anybody lost their life?
Probably not.
Probably not. I agree with you. I would say no. If Donald Trump didn't decide to play golf on Monday, would families been kidnapped? Would any soldiers have died? Would anybody would have lost their lives?
Probably not.
Probably not. I agree. So would that be the same with Tuesday and today? If Donald Trump decided not to play golf, nobody would have lost their lives. I think it's a pretty fair thing to say, right, Dave? Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're comparing, and then I'll let you respond. You're comparing a war where an evil, murderous dictator decided to take over a sovereign nation in Ukraine to Donald Trump spending taxpayer money because he wanted to take a 5-minute joyride around the track. Now, listen, Dave, if you think we've sent too much money to Ukraine, okay, I think that's a very fair conversation.
Do you think we have?
Okay, that's a fair conversation, and I'll have that with you, but let's rewind a little bit. Can you agree with me that analogy that you made, or trying to make a comparison to somebody taking a joyride in the motorcade around Daytona?
No, not at all.
Okay, you're the one who brought up Donald Trump in a motorcade on a speedway and playing golf.
I'm asking, do you have a problem with how taxpayer money is spent? And what,
Okay.
$500 billion? Why not bump it up to $2 or $3 trillion at this point?
Okay, fine, I'll answer that, but you should not have brought up a joyride to Daytona 500 because that has nothing to do with war where innocent people are losing their lives,
I'm talking about taxpayer money being spent.
Okay, well, first of all, Donald Trump shouldn't have gone to Daytona 500 for a joyride. Having a joyride and spending $20 million for a joyride is not the same as families that are losing loved ones and people that are losing their lives. Okay.
I said, do you have a problem with the money being spent? And I'm asking you that question.
Sure.
You're kind of evading it.
I'm not evading it. You're the one who got me upset when you're bringing up a Donald Trump joyride to war. So now I'm going to answer the question about Ukraine. First of all, I do find it interesting that when talking about the war in the Ukraine, and I'm happy to bring up money with you, but what you didn't bring up today was the fact that Donald Trump called Vladimir Zelensky a dictator. So I will answer your question.
I'm perfectly willing to bring that up, but I just wanted to talk about Ukraine.
Okay, so in good faith, I believe in good faith, we can have that conversation if you could answer this. Do you think Vladimir Putin is a dictator? Let's start there.
I do.
Okay, I agree. Do you think Vladimir Zelensky is a dictator?
I'm kind of 50-50 on it. I mean, look, they suspended the elections in Ukraine because of the war. I think that's completely out of line.
That doesn't mean
in alignment with Ukrainian law, which it is, but it's still absurd.
So hold on.
I mean,
hold on.
Sure.
You're saying 50-50 on Zelensky being a dictator because they didn't have an election in the middle of a war, which I think most people would understand. And you're saying,
I don't think people would understand
okay,
that.
well,
I think that's completely ridiculous.
Who do you want to win the war, Russia or Ukraine? Speaking of ridiculous, who do you want to win? Because if we're going to have
I'd like Ukraine to win, but I also live in the real world, and I know that Ukraine lost that war the day it started. They're only being propped up by the U.S. again to the tune of $500 billion. Where is the line going to be drawn?
Okay,
how much money do we have to spend on this?
Okay, hold on. Let me just hear a clear and present answer today. Who do you want? If you had to flip a switch today, who would you want to win, Ukraine or Russia?
I said Ukraine.
Okay. You said probably Ukraine, and then you gave a long. Let's be clear here. Regardless of if you think we spent.
Excuse me, if I said probably Ukraine, I meant I would like Ukraine to win.
Okay.
But I don't. But Ukraine's not going to win.
Well, guess what?
Anybody actually believes that?
Okay, but here's the problem.
Do you think they're going to win?
The president of the United States wouldn't answer that question the way you did. He called Vladimir Zelensky a dictator.
Yeah, well,
Absurd.
If he comes out here and starts saying all this, starts talking all this trash about Putin, like Democrats want him to do, you can wipe negotiations with the country, with Russia, off the table. Because guess what? Okay. Ukraine has no power.
So let me ask you a question, Dave. Let me ask you.
You're also not answering the question.
I am going to answer. I am going to answer the question, but I want to respond to what you just said. Let's be very clear here, okay? Sure. Vladimir Putin has been offered concessions by Donald Trump, dangerous concessions, and we had Pete Hegseth the next day talking about how Ukraine cannot enter NATO. That is the main reason why Putin invaded Ukraine. They've also, and land. We cannot reward an evil, murderous dictator, which you and I do agree on. We can't reward evil, murderous dictators for invading countries. That's number one. Number two, I would say that one could make the argument that maybe we've given Ukraine a little bit too much as far as weaponry is concerned. We're not sending them bags of cash, but weaponry. At the same time, though, while I'm 50-50, I will answer a question the same way you answered yours, but also in a different way. While I'm 50-50 on this is because Putin cannot win this war. Here's what happens if he does. And by the way, I disagree with your assertion that Ukraine has no chance to win. Other countries need to help a little bit more than they have. That is
that's not going to happen.
Okay, so hold on.
In the real world, and you can say that, but
you're a
smart enough guy to know that that's somewhat of a pointless statement because it's not going to happen.
It's not pointless, and I'll tell you what can't happen: offering Putin concessions and giving him what he wants, and that's exactly.
And guess what? What's going to happen? Exactly that, because Ukraine cannot win this war. I don't want them to. They don't. They literally don't even have the men.
So you're okay.
What world do you think Putin's not going to win?
Okay, so here's where we really disagree. You're okay. You're setting a precedent where you're okay as an American for giving concessions to an evil, murderous dictator who invaded our allies. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives. And what you are saying is, let's concede, let's give him what he wants and everything he wants. Hold on. No, but hold on.
Okay, sure.
That's the reality of this. What you are saying is, and you seem to think, and you're talking to me about reality, and you think Zelensky's just going to say okay and raise the white flag?
I'm not saying he's going to say okay, but like I said before, whether he says okay or not, he doesn't have the negotiating power. And I don't think, respectfully, Brian, you're hearing that. He doesn't have the power. Ukraine cannot compare to the U.S. and Russia, period, the end.
Okay, so going by your standards, hold on. Going by your standards now.
Do you disagree with that?
I'm going to answer. I disagree. Going by your standards, okay, you're saying if an evil, murderous dictator invades a country, if they, quote, don't have the power, America should give that evil, murderous dictator everything he wants, and your reasoning behind that is,
I didn't say everything he wants.
Well, that's what Donald Trump is doing, Dave. With all due respect. Give me a break. What is the reason?
How is he giving him everything he wants?
What is the main reason why Putin entered Russia? Why? Or entered Ukraine? Why? Tell me why. What's the main two reasons?
Territory back.
Thank you. That's one of them. What's the other one?
Are you talking about in terms of territory, or
what are the okay? There are two main reasons. Well, anybody would tell you this. Why Putin entered the Ukraine? You just did mention one of them, territory. But by the way, Donald Trump is offering him territory, even though Zelensky won't agree to it.
That was an inevitable outcome.
Okay.
Regardless of if Kamala or Trump is in office.
That's one of them. What was the other one?
I'm not sure what the other one is.
He does not want Ukraine in NATO. That is evident, and that is a fact. And here's the thing, Dave. Those are the two concessions that were offered to Putin. Trump offered that to Putin. So when you say he's not getting what he wants,
here's the other side of that coin. The other side of that coin is we continue a war with Russia for years and years and years and years until what? Russia has infinitely more men than Ukraine. They can last.
All right, so let's go with this for a second. Hypothetically speaking,
do you think that that's not true?
First of all, I think your assessment and your being okay with conceding to an evil, murderous dictator. Here's the problem with that. This is what you're not.
I'm tired of being in 20-year wars.
Okay, guess what? Donald Trump has threatened to put troops on the ground in Greenland. He's threatened to put troops on the ground in Gaza. So please stop it.
What does that have to do with what we're talking about?
Because you're the one who's talking about how much you hate war, and then you voted for a guy who's threatening Greenland, the Panama Canal, and he's threatening to put troops on the ground in Gaza. You voted for this guy. If you're so anti-war.
In Gaza, I mean, we've been funding that. We should pull the hell out of there. And look, Trump's.
We're not. What do you mean? Wait. What do you mean? What do you mean pull the hell out of there? We don't have any troops on the ground there. We don't have troops
Sorry,
in
what I mean by that is we should stop funding that stupid war in Israel and Palestine.
Oh, so we should have
America.
we should have troops on the ground and displace 2 million Palestinians who many of them don't want to leave. We should threaten and have troops on the ground there.
I'll answer that question for you if you'd like me to.
Go ahead.
One main gripe I had with Trump when he was running was I couldn't stand his take on Israel and Palestine. And so I'm in agreement with you that what he wants to do there, I think, is completely ridiculous. By the way, not like Kamala or Biden was really any better with Israel and Palestine, but that's a completely separate issue. I do agree. I think his thing on Palestine and Israel is ridiculous.
But Dave, hear me out. Hear me out on this, Dave, okay? In the first 4 weeks of Donald Trump's administration, Ukraine-Russia conflict is not better. I think one would argue it's much worse now than it was a month ago. He's just called Zelensky a dictator. He has pissed off Canada and Mexico. We've gotten literally nothing in return with the 25% tariff threats. We've had.
It was a 30-day.
Okay,
for 30
right
days,
now,
we did get things
no, we did not. The Mexico, no, we did not. I can go over those with you and give you facts. 10,000 troops. We had 15,000 at the border when Biden was in there, and Trudeau offered $1.2 trillion for border security when Joe Biden was president in December. A fentanyl czar is not going to do anything when under 1% of the fentanyl that's coming into this country is coming from Canada. So respectfully, sir, no.
So how do you think? Well, fine, that's a different subject.
No, it's not. I'm talking about concessions. We're talking about the 25% tariffs. Hold on. I wasn't done yet, though. He's also released a bunch of violent insurrectionists from January 6th, some of whom are either dead or back in jail. I
told you I disagree with that.
I know you disagree with it. I'm just giving you the list of the things he's done in the last month. He blamed plane crashes on DEI hires. He's put Elon Musk in, really President Musk. Why do I say that? Daytona.
Well, he's not a president.
Okay, well, guess what?
Say this as like a quirky little comment.
First of all,
he doesn't have any actual power. But he
doesn't have actual power, yet he has access. He doesn't have any power, yet he has access to all of your personal information and mine. What is he? If he doesn't have power, then why is he doing press conferences in the Oval Office? And why does he have more of our information, social security numbers, and all of our personal information, and he won't tell us what he's doing with it? He won't share his own financials with us. And then we're told if he has a conflict of interest, he's the one that's going to police himself. And you're telling me you're okay with that?
I think a lot of that's absurd. But look, I agree with you. But at the end of the day, it's nice to see that a ton of. I mean, do you think that budgeting shouldn't be cut? I mean, we're
there is a okay. So hold on, let's talk about that.
He's going to be in a conflict of interest. Can you point to anyone in the world that wouldn't be in a conflict of interest if they had a position where they're cutting?
So why do you? Okay, I'll answer that. I'll answer that by saying, why do you think he donated $400 million to the Donald Trump campaign? He just cares about America so much. Come on, I want you to answer this question honestly.
Sure. I mean, you're asking because he wanted Trump to win, and he wants him to win.
Why?
Because he didn't like what Biden and Kamala were doing to the country.
So you think? Hold on.
Americans didn't like either.
So you think he donated $400 million to the Trump campaign simply because he just didn't like some of Joe Biden's policies?
Sure,
that's ridiculous.
Sort of personal benefit in it. Sure.
There you go.
There are billionaires that donate to each party.
Okay, but here's the thing. Here's the difference. We're not talking about somebody who donates $500 or even somebody that donates $1 million for.
I didn't say 500 or a million.
No. Hold on.
There are billionaires that donate to both parties that donate millions.
And guess what? Here's the difference. The Democrat Party doesn't put one of those people in charge where Elon Musk is in charge in all of our information and in charge of Doge, and they don't keep.
You're right. You're right, Brian. Actually, what they did instead was completely downplay how brutal the administration was the last administration. And then they got their asses kicked in the election because they wanted to tell Americans that everything was peaches and cream when we had a president who could barely spell his own name.
Okay, there you go again.
Combat Putin.
Let me tell you something.
I mean,
first of all,
this is why Trump won, and you don't want to hear that.
First of all, the reason why Trump won, with all due respect, Dave, is because I think there's people out there like you that are extremely complicit and you don't realize the danger that Donald Trump is. For example, you called into this show, and I'm happy to have a respectful conversation with you, and I think for the most part, we always do.
I agree.
However,
you're a nice guy, Brian.
I appreciate that, and I think you are as well. But here's my issue. You called into this show, and you didn't seem to bring up the fact, I always have to bring this stuff up, that he called Zelensky a dictator today, and he said Ukraine started this. But yet you don't bring any of that stuff up, and you bring up, geez, I think we've spent too much money on the war.
Well, Well, because obviously talking to you, my time is limited, and I wanted to talk about things that I view are more important. Look, Trump says stupid nonsense every day. I completely agree.
But it's dangerous, Dave. It's not just stupid. It's
what's
dangerous.
More dangerous is us sending hundreds of billions. When is it going to end? So we can just constantly say, well, Putin's bad. Okay. Yeah. And then more people die and more Ukrainians die. They don't have men. And you didn't really want to engage in that conversation.
So
Putin still has over
I did engage in that conversation. And my take is very, very clear. We should not be rewarding evil, murderous dictators for invading our allies. It would be like if hold on. Let me give you and I'm going to give you a real world example. After 9/11, if Canada decided to give Al-Qaeda concessions, would you have been okay with that?
I'm not sure what that even means.
I will tell you exactly what it means. Vladimir Putin is responsible for lives of hundreds of thousands of people that are now gone. He invaded he invaded our allies, okay? Al-Qaeda decided a terrorist attack in America. They wanted to get rid of, wipe off thousands of innocent Americans. Sadly, they were able to do that. They're both terrorism. They're both evil. And what I'm telling you is after somebody, I'm not going to even say the M word, but ends the life of hundreds of thousands of people, we're supposed to, another country, give concessions to Vladimir Putin and reward him, because that's exactly what.
Again, what's the other alternative? To just continue in war against Russia?
I'll tell you what the alternative is.
It's not a sarcastic question.
I'm going to give you an honest.
What is it?
And I'm going to give you an honest answer. And I'll start by saying, if Russia wins, and what I mean by win is Vladimir Putin gets what he wants. He gets land. They're not in NATO. Right. Then I'm going to tell you what is going to happen down the road. He is going to invade more countries.
That's where I disagree. I don't see. People want to say he's Hitler. He's evil. I completely agree. But Hitler was a unique evil. I don't see Putin trying to invade all of these other countries. He has a bone to pick with Ukraine. I still don't agree with it. But he's not trying to take over the world like Democrats want us to think he is.
Okay, so he's not trying to take over the world, and you don't think he would do this again, even though you're rewarding him with attempting to take over a country and rewarding him with land, which Zelensky will never agree to, and rewarding him with concessions and making sure that Ukraine doesn't get into NATO. And yet you're telling me that you're okay with that, and if we just give an evil, murderous dictator what he wants, everything's going to be fine and dandy, and Vladimir Putin will leave the world alone. Dave, with all due respect, you've got the blinders on, and I disagree with you, but I do appreciate your call.